a video on sourdough bread and making it as easy and as faff-free as possible. I've seen lots of videos of people making sourdough, and it seems overly complicated and potentially put you off making it. So this is the easiest recipe and formula that I can think of. Someone will probably be able to make it a lot easier than this. However, I think this is pretty straightforward and pretty easy and as faff-free as possible. So the only thing with sourdough is it takes time. If you're making the normal bread, you could knock up a loaf in an afternoon. Sourdough's not like that. It just takes longer because what you're actually wanting to do is a fermented process that needs to happen, and which builds flavour. Hence the sour. The bread is slightly sour in flavour. So we need to activate the starter first of all. I've made videos of making starters for sourdough. They're pretty straightforward. This is my sourdough starter. It's about a year old now, and it's got loads of good flavour to it. And we need to activate it, which means that we need to feed it so the yeast grows and produces more yeast and carbon dioxide and flavour. So I'm going to make 2 loaves. In here there is 300 grams of water and 300 grams of flour, and then we need to add some starter to that, a good amount, like 2 dessert spoons, and then we're going to mix it together, and then we're going to leave it out, and it will start growing yeast, depending on the temperature of the room, depending how long this will take. But the slower process that it takes, more flavour is going to develop. So this might take 10 hours, might take 12 hours, might take 24 hours. So, but there's no rush, and you can do, you can just make it and leave it, and it will happily ferment over time. So, loads of people make this in a jar. I think it makes a real mess of a jar, and it's quite difficult to clean out the jar once you've done it, so I always make it in a bowl. And I'm going to put a cover on it as well, which I did last time, and it worked a little bit better. So we live and learn, and we get better at things. So that's that, and then we'll just put a bit of cling film on top. I want to see what's going on, so I'm going to put cling film on top. Normally I use shower caps instead of cling film these days, because I like to cut down the amount of plastic that I use. But for this little bit of process here, we really need to put some cling film on. So I should have got it ready. I haven't, but it's that close hand. So it's late at night now, so it's certainly going to get going for 8 or 10 hours while I'm asleep. I'm not going to be sleeping for 10 hours. Probably get going for like these next 8 hours. So we'll see what it's like in the morning, but probably should be ready sometime tomorrow afternoon to start making some bread. So there we go. That's the first process done. Right, as you can see, the starter is now nice and bubbly. Lots of bubbles coming to the top, meaning that there is loads of yeast in there, and it's creating lots of carbon dioxide. So we now need to do the next process, which is mixing the flour, water and starter and a little bit of salt together, and we need to just roughly mix it, not roughly mix it together, but just combine it. We're not going to knead it, we're just going to mix it together, and we're going to leave it rest and stand for an hour. What this process does, from what I'm led to believe, is that the water will soak completely into the flour, and it will and then it will be able to absorb more water into it. There's a proper French name for this. I can never pronounce it. To be honest, I struggle with English words sometimes, even though I am British. But it's an important thing to do. This is one of the crucial bits of making sourdough, and also I would suggest with bread as well. So what we're going to do is it's double the recipe, so it's 1 kilo of flour, and then we want 600 grams of starter in here. Is it 600 grams? Yeah, it's 600 grams. I forget sometimes. Definitely 600 grams. Which would just be about most of it. That's 580. That's about 20 grams. No, it's not. It's more. A little bit less again. And a little bit less again. Now, some people won't add the starter at this stage when they're mixing the water, but I do, because I think there's more water in the starter as well. So I think if you add the starter now, then all the flour is completely saturated with all the water that you can add to it. So that's that. And then we need 2 good pinches of salt, 1, 2, and we need 550 millilitres of water, or 550 grams. So it's double the recipe that I normally use. If you just want to make one loaf, it's half this amount. So it's just a case of bringing it all together, and then the water can completely soak into all the flour. Trying not to get the flour everywhere like I normally do. Again, the thing is, I want to do it with one hand. I'm trying to keep one hand tight, with one hand clean. So I'm trying to mix it with one hand when I should just get in with both hands. So this is also why, this process is also why you rest pastry as well. So it gives the flour in the pastry time to soak up all the water that you put into the pastry. So it's not particularly that by mixing the pastry you've activated the gluten, which a lot of people say that you have. It's just that the flour hasn't had time to soak up all the water entirely, right through to the centre of the flour. Well, that's what I think anyway. That's what I think. Because what I have noticed is when I've added too much water, what would be considered too much water to flour in the past, and then I let it rest, it soaked up all the water and made a really nice pastry. So that's what I'm going with at the moment. Until someone teaches me differently, or I work out something differently, that's what I'm going to believe. So I'm always open to criticism and learning something new. So just need to bring it together, and then I'll give the flour and the water time to soak in together. And then we're going to leave it for an hour, and then we'll leave it, and then we'll knead it for 10 minutes, and we'll talk about kneading and my lack of folding doughs, and why I don't really think you need to do it to start off with. You can do, when you get better at making bread, you can certainly adopt different techniques, but if you just want to make a basic quick loaf with as little effort as possible and get some good results, this is a good method without having to go too deep into it. Because, to be honest, I think some people when they're making sourdough make a right meal of it. Literally, a meal of it. But I think they go a little bit over the top. It almost scared me off wanting to make sourdough bread when I first started, because I just can't thought that is ridiculous what they're doing. But anyway, so leave it for an hour, and then we'll be back. We need to cover it. So I use shower caps because I don't like wasting cling film, and they're reusable. So, and I think of all the sourdough loaves that I've made of this past 18 months, all the little plastic I've saved myself because I've been using shower caps. It's a lot of plastic which hasn't to be recycled and hasn't gone to landfill. So shower caps are great for this. So it has been sitting for an hour, and it is a shaggy, sticky mess. But we're going to knead it for 10 minutes, and then it'll be fine. So there is lots of techniques to kneading, and some people kind of fold it in on itself, and then a few times, and then come back an hour later, and then do it again for another few, folding it in on itself, and then leave it for another hour, and then come back again. That's 3 hours of your life that you have to spend doing that, and it's fine if you're making multiple loaves where you can fold one loaf and then move on to the next loaf, and then move on to the next loaf, and then move on to the next loaf. So you're actually doing something for those 3 hours. But to actually tie yourself up for 3 hours when you're just wanting to make a loaf of bread seems a bit counterproductive in my eyes. Certainly if you're wanting fast results from making a sourdough loaf, if I'm honest. Having to do something like that, it would put me off. So I think 10 minutes of kneading is sufficient, to get you a good enough loaf to start off with, and you'll get some results and some good results and a tasty loaf, and you can then progress. If you want to do all kinds of fancy forming techniques and all that kind of stuff, you can then move on to those type of techniques. But make a decent loaf first, see if it's your type of thing, and then you can expand. So in my eyes, 10 minutes of kneading rather than 3 hours of having to come back to a loaf every hour just seems a little bit counterproductive. So 10 minutes of kneading. I'll show you a little bit of kneading. There's lots of different techniques, but we're basically agitating the gluten in the bread, in the dough, which is going to be able to form a good structure full of air pockets in our final loaf. So we need to knead it for 10 minutes to get the gluten agitated and gloopy, and sort of hold the bread together. So simple case of grabbing and pushing and 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 grabbing and pushing, just like that for 10 minutes. Making sure you do it all over. You don't have to do it for 10 minutes straight. It takes a while to kind of get your muscles ready, like the muscle kind of memory, to be able to knead for 10 minutes solid. I need to put a timer on. It takes a while. It's just like a form of exercise. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So you don't have to do 10 minutes straight. You can break it down. You can do 5 minutes, give yourself a couple of minutes break, and then you can do another 5 minutes. But it needs 10 minutes of kneading. I've tried kneading in my Kenwood mixer, like my electric mixer, and it just never. I just don't think it needs it as like, it just doesn't seem to move it. It just seems to flop it around the bowl. So I don't use the mixer. You can get special mixers that knead bread properly, but they're a fortune, and I don't make that much bread, so I'm not going to invest in one of those. So we're going to do this for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and you'll see how well it forms. Like, it's all still gloopy and it's not particularly forming a good ball at the moment, but it will. It starts to get better after about 5 minutes. Look at me, out of breath. It's because I'm talking. I'm not really unfit. Well, I'm not as fit as I was, but I'm not really unfit. That's not why I'm kind of like gasping for air. It's because I'm talking and kneading at the same time. But it's a shiny mess. 5 minutes will start looking better. 10 minutes we'll have a decent dough ball. But I'm not going to... You've seen the basics. You don't need to see me doing it for 10 minutes. There we go. Much better. More like a proper lump of dough now. So, yeah, I'll talk about... so this needs to prove, which means it needs to double in size. And obviously with the starter it's full of yeast, so we need... That yeast is now all mixed in with the dough evenly, but it also needs time to grow again and start producing carbon dioxide, which is going to give us the lift and improve flavour as well. Not the carbon dioxide won't improve flavour, but the dough needs to ferment, which will produce carbon dioxide and give us flavour as well. So that's fine, doesn't need to be fancily formed. That's on, shower cap on, and let it ferment and let it double in size for however long it takes, depending on the temperature of the room. I can't give you exact temperatures and how long it will take. It's just one of those things. But it is now 10, 11 o'clock at night, so I've got no qualms about leaving that to ferment at room temperature. We're in winter-ish, nearly spring, thank God. So that can be left out all night, and we'll see how it is in the morning. But 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, maybe 15 hours, depending on the time of year and the temperature of the room. No kind of great rush. But also, you can't really over ferment it at this stage. So if it was fermenting for 6 hours and you went out for 3 hours and you came back and it had doubled in size and you were panicking and worrying that you'd over fermented it, it's not a problem. An hour or two over proving at this stage is not an issue at all. It's fine. All you'll really do is it'll just develop more flavour. It'll carry on fermenting and producing carbon dioxide, because however long, because there's still plenty of food in that dough for the yeast to eat. So as long as there's food in there, it'll carry on fermenting. So it can overprove for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and it not be a problem. So I'm going to go to bed. Not yet. I'm going to have a drink, and then it'll be fine while the morning. Now, so flour, although you won't think it is abrasive. So if you're going to knead on your worktops at home, eventually over time what will happen is it will dull your worktops, and eventually if they are like chipboard with plastic coating on them, it will wear through the plastic and make them become dull, and you'll see a patch where you've been kneading. So what I use is an old butcher's block, and I put that on top of the work surface, and then butter it up against the wall so it's not moving, and I'm always pushing the dough that way so it's not going to go anywhere. It's nice and big and heavy. But a piece of plyboard, something like that, just to protect your work surfaces. If you're not bothered about your work surfaces, or your work surface is particularly hard wearing, that's not an issue. But just a little bit of advice, and I would recommend you use a butcher's block. It tends to make my dough a little bit ragged because it's not particularly smooth anymore, and it's not particularly clean. I'm not bothered about that, to be honest. That's one of those rules that goes straight out the window with me. But anyway, so that's about kneading. This is going to now prove for however long it takes, and we'll be back when it's doubled in size and it's nice and bubbly. 18 hours later, and as you can see, it has doubled in size and lots of nice bubbles wanting to come popping through to the top there and there and there and there and there. If you look underneath, you can see that it's all nice and stringy, which means that there's loads of air pockets being produced. So the next stage is to knock it back, which means knocking most of the air out of it, and then it's time for the second-ish proof. So it's not really a proof. I'm not going to prove it again like we've just done. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put it in a makeshift proving basket that I've got, that I made myself. You don't need to buy them. I thought they were kind of expensive for a bit of plastic, if I'm honest. I might buy myself one one day, but I just looked at it and I kind of thought, God, that's expensive for that price. So we're going to knock most of that air out of it, and then we're going to put it in the makeshift proving basket, and I'm going to put it in the fridge for 6 hours. And it will prove a little bit, not much. So knock all that air out of it. I'm not going to form it into a fancy shape. I'm not going to roll it into a loaf or anything like that. I'm just going to plonk it. Half of it's going to go in one proving basket and half of it's going to go in the other. And then I'm going to put it in the fridge for 6 hours, and then I'm going to bake it. So apart from a bit of mixing and a bit of kneading for 10 minutes, not much work's gone into this loaf at all. It's taken a bit of time, but I've done other things in that time. So that's about half, which is fine. And straight into, I should have shown you the proving basket. I'll do the other one. So that's that. It's just a bowl with a flat cotton cloth in it. So nothing bobbly like toweling, a flat cotton cloth or a bit of, so it's like that. So it's just flat, and then a tiny bit of string round the outside of it, just to keep because it's not a rounded bowl, it's got a flat bottom. So I've tied a bit of string around it just so it creates a bowl shape in there, and then dusted it with flour, and then we need to dust some flour on top of there. The flour that you dust it with doesn't need to be bread flour, it can just be plain old flour, and just a bit on top, because that's going to be, we're going to tip it out into the baking container when we bake it, and that's going to be the bottom. So it's just best off to have a little bit of flour on the bottom, and also if it rises, it's not going to touch the shower cap. So that one there, and then the other one is going to go in here. I think it's a bit smaller, but it doesn't matter. Just means we'll get two different sizes of loaves, but I'm making two. One of them I'm going to cook in 6 hours time, and then the other one I'm going to cook in 6 hours time will be quite late at night, and I don't want to be cooking 2 loaves of bread, so this one I'm going to cook in the morning. So we'll see how different they are. If I'm sure 6 hours is about right in the fridge, but you can have it in for longer. And so, as always, I don't let the bread dictate to me how. I'm not going to live my life around how the dough wants to behave. It's, you know, I'm going to go out when I want. I'm going to cook it when I want. So, quick tip: if you want to get rid of dough off your hands because it's kind of quite sticky, just a bit of flour, rub your hands together. And what that does It's a mild abrasive as well, like I explained with the chopping board and kneading the bread. It just means that it dries out the dough and gets rid of it off your hands pretty straightforward, like that. And then you can just wash your hands with just a bit of soap and water, and all the dough's not stuck to your hands. So that's it. They're going to go in the fridge. One of them's going to cook in 6 hours time, and then they'll cook the other one in the morning, which will be like another 12 hours time. So it's kind of a long process, and kind of dependent on the temperature of the room, but a long process is going to improve the flavour of the bread, if I'm honest. So even though by the time we finish this, it'll be like 2 days worth of faffing around. You know, so if you kind of want a loaf of bread for Saturday morning, you kind of need to be thinking about making it on Wednesday, starting it on Wednesday. But I don't know. Could you be bothered to do something like this, like I do? I'm not entirely sure, but this is a faff-free way of making really good quality sourdough bread. But anyway, that's it for the moment. So it has been in the fridge for 6 hours. It's risen a little bit because we've got some bubbles wanting to come through, and the flour's spread out a bit. That's how we can tell it's risen slightly, but not too much. But most of the rise is going to come in this the cooking process. Should do anyway. I'm sure 6 hours in the fridge is long enough, and more than that, I'm not normally particularly bothered about it rising that much with the second proof. So in a second, the oven is on full, on fan, as high as it will go, and I've got a cast iron pot in there with a lid, which has been heating up for half an hour, and I'm going to pull it out in a second, and we're going to flip that into it. You don't have to use a cast iron pot when you're starting off with. You can just use the thick bottom pan, as long as it can go in the oven with a lid on it. That's fine. So something like that would be fine with a lid, as long as the lid and the pan can go in the oven. And it needs to be quite a thick bottom because it wants to retain the heat particularly well. However, when I first started out making sourdough, I used to use this. Which is a old frying pan with the handle taken off, an old wok with the handle taken off, and that's what I used to use as my closhed dome to cook the bread in. So the bread would go in there, that would go on as a lid, and it would steam and rise in the side of there. And this is an old paella pan, and that's heavy duty cast iron, and that would heat up, and they would all heat up, and it would act kind of like a cast iron pan. You'll see it in a second. So you don't have to buy a cast iron pan. The bread is better because of it, but if you're just starting out, kind of use what you've got. You don't have to rush out and buy really expensive things to make quite good quality sourdough bread. The important thing is getting the cast iron pot or whatever cooking thing you're going to use to cook the sourdough in out of the oven quickly and back in the oven quickly, so the oven nothing has chance to cool down too much. Also, what I would have done, if you haven't got a big cast iron paella pan like that, which retains the heat and stops the oven from cooling down too quickly, because that will pump hot, that'll help heat the oven back up quickly with the heat that's in that cast iron pot that you've had in the oven. What I would have done was I would put a couple of house bricks in the bottom of the oven, and that would have helped the oven stay really hot. So now we'll take the cast iron pot out of the oven, and you will see what we're going to do. What I have got, I'll explain it now. I've got a craft knife. You can buy special tools for slicing on the top of breads. I just use a thin bladed craft knife, and we're just going to quickly score across the top of it. So you don't have to spend a lot on that. Knives aren't really sharp enough to do it. Even a chef would struggle to get their knife sharp enough or thin enough to slice across the top of sourdough. So a razor blade would work just fine. Stanley knife, small little craft knife. Anyway, so cast iron pot out of the oven. Like that. The lid should be on the proper way, but it's not, but it doesn't matter. So we're going to tip the bread into the cast iron pot, like that. And then we're going to score across the top of the bread, like that. A nice score. And then lid on, in the oven for half an hour. So I'll set the timer, so I know it's going to take half an hour. And then what we're going to do after that half an hour, we'll take it out of the pot and we'll carry on cooking the bread at lower temperature. We'll also take the pot out of the oven as well, because the oven, pot will keep the oven too hot, and we don't want on the second cook of the bread, we don't want it to be too hot. So quick note, as you'll see, I've been using my chopping board, and the cast iron pot has slightly scorched my wooden chopping board. I use a wooden chopping board on top of the kitchen top, because I don't want to burn the kitchen top. So unless you have a kitchen top that can take a lot of heat, don't be putting cast iron pots on your worktops. So we'll leave that for half an hour, and we'll come back and we'll see how it's risen. It has now had 30 minutes and it's ready to take out. I need to get that ready. So let's close the oven for a second, and we'll turn it down to 200 to finish off the cooking process. Lid off, and there you go. So as you can see, a lot of the rise has happened in the cooking process rather than needing to be proved. So this will go back in the oven to finish off the cooking. And that wants to come off there. So I don't really know why you don't need to have to prove it particularly much for this for the second time, and I don't really know why it needs to go into the fridge for like 6 hours, although I do know that what I have when we at the knocking back process, I've knocked it back and then I put it in the proving basket for half an hour or so, and then I tried to cook it and it didn't work. So I don't know why, I just know it works. Normally I like to know why things happen for a reason, and the reasons behind them, and because I need to understand. I don't understand this yet. I will do at some stage, so that I'll kind of update as I kind of go along, but I know this works. And then I've got another one still in the fridge, which we'll do in the morning, and then we'll kind of have like a comparison. I'll start the video just when it's coming out of the oven for the first time. There's no point showing you putting it in the oven again, because it's exactly the same thing. You'll just know that it's the bread that's been in the fridge for 12 hours, and then we can have a look at that as like as a comparison. If you need to put it in the fridge longer than 6 hours, is 12 hours better? Is 6 hours just the right amount of time? So it's just a comparison more than anything else, because I'm always learning. It's like I'm better now at bread than I was 6 months ago. Certainly a lot better than I was a year ago. So you're constantly improving and honing your skills. But anyway, that's it. We'll carry on cooking for another half an hour or so at 200 degrees, and then we'll take it out and we'll let it cool. It's too late to carve into it tonight, so it'll be in the morning, and we'll have a look at it in the morning. Right, so the bread's had another half an hour in a cooler oven at 200 degrees, and it's ready. We can tell it's ready because it makes a sound like this. It sounds hollow. It's tempting to carve into it now, but you can't, because it'll just it doesn't carve particularly well when it's straight out of the oven. It needs to cool for half an hour, even though it is really tempting just to kind of carve into it and I'll rip a bit off, but it's moist inside, and any kind of carving that you do now will just kind of mush. Although it feels solid, it'll just kind of like want to develop, the knife will want to kind of mush it down and squish it, which is not what you want. So half an hour, 40 minutes before you can carve into it, but it will be delicious. This looks particularly good. I'm not too happy around these bits around here. I don't think that'll be, we'll have a nice open grain there. I'm not sure we'll have a nice open grain around there, but we'll see. This is the one for the 6 hours, and then we'll cook the other one in the morning, and we'll have a look at that. But it's late now, I'm going to go to bed, so we'll carve into that in the morning, and we'll see what it looks like in the morning, because I'm not going to wait around for half an hour to let it cool enough just to carve into it. it can wait until tomorrow morning. Right then, so the second loaf is baked. There is a bit of a size difference, as you can see, but I've weighed them, and this one has got 200 grams worth. It's 200 grams heavier than that one, so that's the reason why that one exploded, and this one's not so exploded kind of much. So that should be 100 grams heavier. That really should be 100 grams lighter with the amount of dough that's in them. So obviously that's a miscalculation on my behalf. I should have weighed them out and been exactly, this is half the amount of dough for this proving basket, this is half the amount of dough for that proving basket. That's the reason why they have done that. But it goes to show, this one was in the fridge for 6 hours in the proving, the second proving, and this was in the fridge for 12 hours. And so it doesn't. So 6 hours is a good time to have them in the oven. So I'm not going to cut into that one because I'm going to give it to a friend. So I can't really give them half a loaf that's been cut into. That seems a little bit mean, because then I would have to explain what I've been doing. I don't want to have to do that. I'm just going to give them half a loaf of bread because I haven't seen them in a while. And right, so we'll cut into this one. And then we'll kind of see what kind of what it looks like inside. I think it'll look amazing. I mean, I really should give them the big loaf, but I want to cut into this one, and they'll never know. They'll never see this video. I don't think they're online. So it's sourdough is a faff. If you want to make easy bread, buy fast-acting yeast and make it that way, and buy a bread maker. But this is about as simple as I can make sourdough. Look at that instruction. Look at that. Isn't that impressive? So for as little work as possible, faff-free, for the best results, for not having to look after it too much. 10 minutes of kneading, a bit of mixing, a bit of looking at it every few hours, see if it's risen enough. I think that is as faff-free as possible that I can make sourdough. Obviously, I live and learn, and I learn more things, and as I learn more things, I'll update videos and things. But so if I find an easier way to do it, I will post in the future an easier way of making sourdough bread. But there we go. The grain's quite open. You're not going to get much butter on that. Butter on that. But that one will be a nicer loaf. But there you go. As easy as I can make sourdough bread for you, without you having to go. Basic knowledge, and you'll be able to achieve something like that. You don't have to faff around too much, and do all kinds of fancy forming. I never formed it into a loaf. I never formed it into a bowl. I didn't do the fancy roly thing and kind of stretching it all out. I just plonked it in the proving basket, and that's what you turn out with. So there you go. Easy, not easy, but as easy as I can make it sourdough.